A faint hint of like this nutty Edam cheese. This is so full-bodied. This has got wonderful acidity. I believe the most intimidating thing about wine is the terminology. It can seem like Martian to a lot of casual drinkers. I judge in about 5 to 6 wine competitions a year. I'm on press trips throughout the year, a lot of times with wine media, wine journalists, winemakers. So you get inundated with this terminology. When I'm with young people that are new in this space and really want to prove themselves, I see them doubling down on this wine speak. I'm not picking on them because I was there too in the past. It's ironic because the younger generation, we should be focusing on making wine fun, friendly, and casual. I'm going to translate some wine tasting terms and then we're going to see it applied to real tasting. I have 4 wines. One of them was number 9 in Wine Spectator's top 10 values of 2023. Creme de la Cassis, earth, maybe a faint hint of like this nutty Edam cheese. Wine technically has 1,000 volatile compounds. It's the most complex beverage on the planet. Tea is in second place with about 600 volatile compounds. That means there's a lot going on here. Neurologically, I've seen different facts and figures saying that we can only detect about 50 bits of information per second consciously. So you gotta think about it. If there's 1,000 volatile compounds in a glass of wine, you can only identify about 50 at most. That means everybody's gonna get different flavors. Don't have to be intimidated by wine flavors. It's completely subjective. If you feel like wine tastes like puppies or smells like puppies, then wine smells like puppies. I've seen so many times people sniff and then afraid to say what they smell because they think that they might be wrong, but whatever you get, you get. That's the fun thing about wine. Oh, this is so rich. It's got so much body. Body and richness is how full the wine feels on the palate. I like to equate it to milk. If you think about some lighter bodied wines, maybe some white wines, that's more like skim milk. You step into some entry-level reds that might feel like 2% on the palate. You get into a full-bodied wine, something like a big Bordeaux that might be more like whole milk. And then if you get into something that's massive, like a big dry Zinfandel or a California Cab, that can almost be like heavy cream. I like to use those analogies from my days working in coffee. I used to love making coffee drinks. There are certain factors that bring up the perception of body on the palate. More alcohol, more residual sugar, more tannins, which we'll cover later, that will make the wine feel more full-bodied. This has got really good acidity. There is acidity naturally in grapes. A lot of people get confused when I talk about acidity wine. It's that sourness or tartness that you feel, and there's different levels of tolerance. Acidity is what makes your mouth water, gives that sensation of juiciness. Me personally, I loved lemonade when I was a kid. I love high acidity. That's why I like Riesling, other high acid grapes like Sangiovese, Pinot Noir. It does irk me when I hear wine professionals say, oh, that has good acidity. Well, what's good acidity for you? I don't know, just my personal pet peeve. Big time tannins. They're chewy, they're round. Tannins can come from the skin, the pip, or the seeds of a grape. It can also come from wood if you're aging the wine in oak. It binds to the saliva in your mouth, giving that astringency feeling, that sense of dryness, although consumers, a lot of people get dryness and tannins confused. Certain grapes have more tannins than others, and white wines do have a tiny touch of tannin, by the way, fun fact. That wine is so structured. Body, acidity, and tannins make up the structure of a wine. When you think about structure, I think of the acidity being the spine, kind of like the mainframe. The tannins are like the surroundings that hold that container of wine in your mouth together. Then body is what fills it. Higher acidity is going to bring the perception of body down. More tannins is going to bring the body up. Residual sugar as well brings the perception of body up. There's different structure for different types of wines. When I smell this wine, when I taste this wine, it's just in perfect balance. Balance is the term used to describe the equilibrium of fruit, alcohol, body, tannins, and acidity. I find balance to be really dependent on the grape variety or style of wine or the personal preference of the taster. Some people like really tannic wines like big Cabernet Sauvignon. You think of Mourvedre, an exotic grape for me that's high in tannins, Plavets Mali, Nebbiolo, for instance. Those tannins can be really astringent and they can be out of balance for a lot of people, but for that specific variety, that specific wine, it is in balance. I love Riesling, but sometimes that acidity, that sourness can be too much for people. However, it's in balance for that specific grape or that specific wine. You have some grapes like Grenache, they're high in alcohol. You have other grapes like Semillon, maybe Formant from Hungary, that aren't necessarily fruity. But does that mean they're out of balance? It's all about personal preference. Great minerality, you really get that sense of terroir. Minerality, something that's often discussed in wine. To me, they're two separate things. You can have mineral flavors. The thing that us geeks, us nerds love about wine is that sense of terroir. When you can taste that earthiness, you can really get these flinty type flavors. You can taste things like crushed rock, chalk. Minerality is a sensation to me. I know that Karen McNeil highlighted this in her book, The Wine Bible. My first ever trip abroad was to Iceland. I used to love solo backpacking in nature. Remember in Iceland, there's glacial meltwater. You can just dip your cup in the ditches and then just drink it. And you get this real sensation, almost this gritty-like texture that kind of stimulates the sides, the ends of your palate. And that's what I feel like the sensation of minerality is. Of course, this is up to much debate. That's just my opinion. Man, this wine is so linear, it's so focused. Linear or focused flavors, that's when you get just this rush, this delineation of a specific flavor and it shoots right down your palate. I think the best example of this is fresh squeezed orange juice versus orange juice you buy from the store. If you ever had real fresh squeezed orange juice, that flavor of orange along with the high acidity just shoots straight down the palate. The ultimate example of this for me are wines made of grapes like Riesling, Chenin Blanc, or even the wine Chablis and Burgundy made from Chardonnay. Big time fruit, but yet it's a dry wine. A lot of tasters get dry confused with big time tannins or that sensation on the palate. In the beginning, when you pick the grapes and you ferment the grapes into alcohol, if all that residual sugar ferments down to alcohol, that means it's a dry wine. However, a lot of tasters get that sensation of tannins, that astringency, that cottonmouth type feeling, and that's what they say a dry wine is. Some wine professional sommeliers get upset about that. Doesn't really bother me that much. The tension here is so great. It really pulls on the palate. For me personally, the best example of tension is a high acid grape like Riesling. It just has this electricity on the palate. Again, I'm gonna go back to that fresh squeezed juice analogy. You have this wonderful tension between the fruit flavors, the fresh orange and that acidity. It's almost like a game of tug of war on the palate. That's what I get a lot with great dry Rieslings. It's really angular. You really feel it on the palate. Angular, this is when wines are either really high in tannins or really high in acidity. It almost feels like there's little spears going around on your palate. Those tannins can be real sharp. It almost is like they're scraping against your palate. Or a high acid grape like Riesling, Chenin Blanc. That acidity, it's almost like little razor blades going all along your gums. I don't like this wine. It's so backwards. Wines can go through a dumb phase immediately after they're bottled, or if they're wines made to be aged, or if they're just cheap wines that are not meant to be aged. The fruit doesn't really show forward. The wines are kind of austere. They're not showing a ton. It happens with great wines that are supposed to be aged. I find it an excuse a lot of times, like for great Burgundy, great Bordeaux, when the wine's not showing that well. A lot of producers, importers, or whoever's selling wines, like, oh, the wine's in a backwards phase right now, which may be the case, but sometimes it's also the wine's just not good. This wine is so complex, so complex. Complexity is when you have multiple layers of a wine. You'll have the fruit, you'll have some earthy notes, you'll have something sometimes you can't identify, but there's a bunch of layers. You can taste them all distinctively, yet they come together really well, almost like if you've had fine dining, or I think Italian cuisine is a great example of this, based on 3 to 5 flavors at most, fresh ingredients, and you can taste all the flavors individually when you have the dish, yet they come together and the dish is just beautiful. I think a good example of this is like a real high quality eggplant parmesan. Let's put that into practice and taste some wines, including several wines I've never tasted before. First up, we have a wine from Israel. This is the Recanati Betuni 2022. This is not a political channel. But the cool thing about this wine is it's an Israeli wine bought from vineyards in Palestine. So there's Arabic and there's Hebrew on it. I met one of the employees of this producer while I was judging at Mundus Vini earlier this year. Coming from somebody that loves and studies hardcore about exotic wine grapes, I've never heard of Batuni before. It's not even in the wine Bible when it comes to wine grapes, called wine grapes. A lot of times grapes have synonyms, but they might be a grape that you commonly know. I haven't found any information on Batuni. $38. It is available in the US. Let's check it out. Okay, first of all, this is really light in color. It's almost like a rosé, although I think it's supposed to be a red wine. Okay, really pretty nose. The fruits I get in this are strawberry, a little bit of like unripe red raspberry. Sometimes, I love raspberries personally. Sometimes you get them out of the supermarket and they're not sweet yet. They're a little bit unripe and you're like, darn it! But you spend a lot on them, they're still good, so you still eat them, or at least I do. Some type of mineral notes. I definitely get like a chalky sensation. It's pretty complex for a lighter red. Almost sometimes reminds me of some darker rosés. You get some of those in Puglia, made out of Negro Amaro. Cyprus makes some dark rosés as well. Tavel in southern France. It's earthy, strawberry, raspberry. It's not quite Pinot Noir-y, but like similar in body color. More of a lighter bodied skim milk type feel on the palate. Not angular, the tannins aren't very big at all. They don't dry your palate out a lot. This is a wine that's light, refreshing. I would love to have a little bit chilled on a summer day with salad sitting outside. But the cool thing is I love lighter reds, or even rosés for that matter, but I don't like when producers don't really care about them. They just kind of throw them out there. This to me has complexity. It's got depth. To me, hardcore 90 points on this. I know it's a little more expensive for that type of wine, but it's a rare variety. It's the only producer I know making this variety. To me, for a lighter red, this is balanced. There is just a touch of real small touch of tannin. There's acidity, but it's not too sharp. It's not too sour. And it's got complexity. A lot of these lighter reds or even darker rosés sometimes cannot be complex. I think that's gorgeous. Let's move on. Never tasted from this producer before, a grape I love, a region I love. This is the Fattoria Carpineta Fontalpino Vigna Dofana single vineyard wine, Chianti Classico, Gran Selezione 2018. This comes in at $55. Gran Selezione is the highest level of Chianti Classico. You have Chianti Classico Annata, then you have Chianti Classico Riserva, and then the best of the best supposed to be the Gran Selezione. Chianti Classico is not to be confused with Chianti, which comes from a larger area in central Tuscany, whereas Chianti Classico comes from a smaller area right in the center heart. One of my favorite regions in the world, high elevation, based off Sangiovese, a grape you know I just love. All these wines I picked because I think they'd show some of the things that we were talking about here. Sangiovese is a grape I love. Not everybody loves it. Can be high in acidity, can be high in tannins, can be a little too tough for a lot of people. Love the nose. It's got the typical sour cherry, earth, a little bit of cedar, like literally like cedar mulch, tobacco type flavors, incredibly complex. Some earth, I could drink Sangiovese all day, every day. Sangiovese wines are usually more medium-bodied, although they have big-time tannins, which make people think they're more full-bodied. I love how they have just explosive aromas. This, to me, high acidity for a red grape, real sour, real tart. I have a friend that likes wine casually, and when I try to give him Sangiovese wines, he says it's too tart. Sangiovese, especially Chianti Classico, sometimes can be so tannic. It's real tough. You really need meat to bind to the tannins. This right here is really in balance. It's more of a medium to full body, between like 2% whole milk. Tannins dry your mouth out a little bit, but they're not angular, they're not sharp. This is just, a lot of times Chianti Classico you need to have with steak. This I want to drink by itself. This is a complex. That means there's so many layers of flavors. You get the fruit, you get the earth, you get a little bit of spice. It's just a gorgeous wine. Great Chianti Classico, 94 points hard. It's the type of red wine I want to drink every single day. Okay, moving on. This is a wine that's widely available, affordable, was number 9 on one Spectator's top 10 values of 2023. This is the St. Cosme Côte de Rhône 2022. This comes in at 18 bucks, can be found throughout the country. When you see Côte de Rhône, a lot of times they are GSM wines based on Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre, although they can have grapes like Carignan, Cinsault, Counois in them. This one, however, is 100% Syrah, which is quite unique for the Southern Rhône. This is a fantastic house known for their Gigondas, although they make some other great wines like Côte Rôtie, Châteauneuf de Pape are great. Côte de Rhône, one of the best wine values in the world. In fact, my most viewed long-form video is a blind tasting of Côte de Rhône. I didn't include this wine. This, to me, I love Côte de Rhônes from the Northern Rhône because they're based on Syrah. It's a grape I love. Not everybody loves this grape, but when you like it, you really start to crave it. This is from the Southern Rhône. This to me has blackberry, black raspberry. Speaking of weird flavors, I get marshmallow in this. Like I said, you get what you get. A little bit of pepper, more white pepper than black pepper, a little bit of stemminess when you go out in the forest. I grew up living on a farm, going out in the woods, smelling those twigs in the late spring. The marshmallow really comes out here. This is really spicy on the palate. Here's the thing. There are tannins here, so you feel the astringency on the palate. Big time fruit, although it's a dry wine. I know that we can confuse a lot of normal drinkers with this. Wine geeks talk about the fruit being sweet, even though it's a dry one, because the fruit is so intense here. The blackberries, the black pepper. This, to me, is a wine people might think is out of balance. It has big-time tannins, like kind of normal tasters. People like me that don't mind this type of tannins, I absolutely love it. You want steak with this wine, Syrah and steak, just go excellent. I would love to have a hanger steak. This is a wine that's confusing in terms of body, more medium bodied, more like 2% milk, but however, those big-time tannins make the wine feel bigger than it actually is. That's why you have to pay attention to this type of thing. I think this is a wine that punches way above its price point. To me, right now, I'm 91 on this. However, I think a lot of casual drinkers might not like it as much with those tough tannins. For wine geeks, I think this is a heck of a buy, especially if you love Syrah. That's really good. We're gonna end with whites. I know it looks confusing, but in certain places of the world, like Burgundy, you start tasting with the reds, you end with the whites. This is a high acid white grape Riesling, so I think it'll clean off my palate well. This is the Weingut Krebs, which means crabs in German. This is a Riesling from the Pfalz. This is the Hersheimer Honigsack. So this is a single vineyard Riesling. I don't know if they're imported in the US, but there it's 20 bucks. German Riesling, some of the best values in the world, especially when you're in the country. Notice I'm tasting out of a different glass. I had 3 different glasses here. I had my Rovsya Burgundy glass, inexpensive. I had a Gabriel Glas. This is the Riedel 002 glass. I'll put them all in the description box if you want to check them out. Riesling from the Pfalz is a little bit bigger and stout. My favorite region for Riesling is actually the Nahe, or Naha, whatever you want to pronounce it. Pfalz tend to be a little bit bigger. There is some creaminess here. Just tons of lemon, white pepper, white apricot type flavors, but the lemon, the citrus, the apple blossom, this is complex. This is where you can identify several of the flavors, but yet they also come together. There's a little creamsicle component to this I like. Almost like lemon shaved ice type flavor. This is brilliant wine. Again, can be out of balance for a lot of people. There's so much acidity. It is super tart, although I've had Rieslings that are more extreme than this. It's complex. I told you about all the layers on the palate. More like skim to 2% type milk in terms of body. However, this is an angular wine. You feel the razor blades, you feel the sharpness, the angular sensation on this. You gotta love Riesling, you gotta love high acidity. To me, this is the best wine here I've tasted. I'm telling you, man, German Rieslings for the price you pay, this is 94 plus points to me. I think that's how great this Riesling is. This is phenomenal. So tell me, what type of wine terms confuse you? Or do you have any different interpretations of the ones I talked about? I'd love to hear. Drop it in the comments below.